The chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of the Riverside Country Club as my cousin Marcus raised his champagne flute high above the crowd. 300 guests in designer suits and silk dresses turned their attention to the makeshift stage, where my father beamed with the kind of pride I'd never seen directed at me. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. To my nephew Marcus Rivera, my father announced, his voice carrying the authority that had built Rivera Construction into a multi-million-dollar empire. Harvard MBA, youngest partner at Goldman Sachs, and now the man who just closed the biggest municipal contract in our family's history. The applause thundered through the ballroom, crystal glasses clinked, women in pearls dabbed their eyes with satisfaction. This was a success. This was what the Rivera name meant to everyone in that room. My father's eyes swept across the crowd until they found me, standing near the service entrance in my rumpled khakis and polo shirt, the same clothes I'd worn to work that morning, mopping floors at Meridian Technologies. His expression shifted from pride to something colder, more calculating. And then there's my son Diego, he continued, his voice dropping just enough that the microphone caught every word, who reminds us all that every family tree has its... He paused, letting the silence stretch like a blade. Practical branches. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Not the warm kind you share with friends, but the uncomfortable kind that people use to fill awkward spaces. I felt my cheeks burn as 300 pairs of eyes found me, cataloged me, dismissed me. Someone has to keep the floors clean while the rest of us build empires, right, Diego? More laughter. Someone near the bar actually snorted. I managed a weak smile and raised my plastic cup of punch in a mock toast. But inside, my chest felt like it was caving in. 34 years old, and I was still the family disappointment. The Rivera, who couldn't quite measure up. The son who chose mops over mortgages. What they didn't know was that tomorrow morning, I'd be walking into the executive boardroom at Meridian Technologies for a meeting that would change everything. What they couldn't imagine was that the janitor they mocked had security clearance so high it required 3 separate background checks. What they'd never believe was that Admiral Diego Torres, retired U.S. Navy, was standing right in front of them, wearing the uniform of invisibility by choice. But tonight, in this glittering ballroom filled with the smell of prime rib and superiority, I was just Diego the disappointment. And my father wasn't finished with his performance. The Riverside Country Club had been my family's stage for celebrations since before I was born. Graduations, promotions, business deals. If it mattered to the Rivera clan, it happened here among the oil paintings of dead rich men and tables that cost more than most people's cars. I'd learned to hate this place as a child, the way the servers moved like ghosts, invisible until needed. The way my father's voice changed when he was performing for his peers, becoming smoother, more calculated. The way my mother would grip my shoulder too tightly when I didn't behave exactly as expected. Tonight felt different, though, heavier. Like the air itself was thick with years of accumulated disappointment. My cousin Marcus stepped up to the microphone, his smile perfect and practiced. At 28, he'd already accomplished more than most people managed in a lifetime. Harvard undergrad, Stanford MBA, Goldman Sachs fast track. The golden boy who made my father wish genetics worked differently. "Thank you, Uncle Roberto," Marcus said, his voice carrying just the right amount of humility. "This contract isn't just about me, it's about the Rivera legacy. It's about what we build when we refuse to settle for ordinary." His eyes found mine across the room. The message was clear. My mother, Elena Rivera, stood near the head table in a navy dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She caught my eye and offered a tight smile, the kind that said, "Please don't embarrass us further." I'd seen that smile my entire life. It was her default expression whenever I entered a room. "You know what I love most about this family?" Marcus continued, his confidence filling every corner of the ballroom. "We don't accept mediocrity. We push each other to excellence. We understand that the Rivera name means something." Another pointed look in my direction. I shifted against the wall, suddenly hyper-aware of my work clothes, the faint smell of industrial cleaner that probably clung to my hands despite 3 washings. Around me, the crowd hung on Marcus's every word like he was delivering gospel. Some people are content with small dreams, he said. They clock in, clock out, collect their paychecks, and call it a life. But not us. We build, we create, we lead. The applause was deafening. I watched my father's face glow with vicarious pride, the kind I'd stopped hoping for years ago. Which brings me to an announcement, Marcus said, his smile widening. Goldman Sachs has offered me a position heading their new West Coast expansion. I'll be moving to Los Angeles next month to lead a team of 40 analysts. The room erupted. Champagne flutes clinked like church bells. My Aunt Carmen actually squealed with delight. This was the kind of success the Rivera family understood. Visible, quantifiable, impressive to strangers at cocktail parties. My father grabbed the microphone back, his face flushed with bourbon and pride. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what I'm talking about. Leadership, vision, the courage to aim high and hit your target. He paused, scanning the room until his eyes landed on me again. Of course, not everyone in the family inherited that particular gene, he added, his tone shifting to something sharper. But that's all right. The world needs workers too. Someone has to empty the trash cans while the visionaries change the world. The laughter was louder this time. I felt it like physical blows, each chuckle a small humiliation. Near the bar, my Uncle Fernando whispered something to his wife that made her cover her mouth and giggle. I wanted to disappear, to slip out the service entrance and drive home to my one-bedroom apartment where the only judgment came from my reflection in the bathroom mirror. But something kept my feet planted. Maybe stubbornness. Maybe masochism. Maybe the faint hope that this moment would finally end and we could all pretend it never happened. You know what Diego's problem is? My father continued, his voice carrying that particular mixture of disappointment and public therapy that he specialized in. No ambition, no drive. Content to spend his days pushing a mop around some office building while his cousin conquers Wall Street. Marcus tried to look uncomfortable, but I caught the small smirk he thought he was hiding. This was his night, his moment to shine brighter by making me look dimmer. I mean, at 34, most men have figured out their purpose, my father went on. They've built something, achieved something, made their mark on the world. But, Diego... He shrugged. A gesture that somehow contained decades of accumulated frustration. Diego seems perfectly happy being invisible. If only he knew how right he was about the invisible part, and how wrong he was about everything else. The crowd had settled into uncomfortable silence now, sensing that this performance had crossed from celebration into something else entirely. But my father was drunk on audience, and bourbon, and he wasn't finished. Don't get me wrong, he said, his voice taking on the fake warmth he used when he wanted to sound magnanimous. Every family needs its worker bees. Someone has to do the jobs that the achievers don't have time for. And Diego has found his calling with that mop and bucket. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the ice settling in glasses across the room. Even Marcus looked genuinely uncomfortable now, perhaps realizing that his uncle had gone too far. My mother stepped forward, her face pale. Roberto, maybe we should... Should what? He interrupted. Should I pretend that Diego's career choices are something to celebrate? Should acting like mopping floors be equivalent to closing million-dollar deals? Should I lie to make everyone feel better? He turned back to the crowd, his arms spread wide like he was delivering a sermon. This is the difference between my generation and these kids today. We don't coddle failure, we call it what it is. And maybe, just maybe, a little public accountability will motivate Diego to finally reach for something higher than a janitor's cart. The words hit me like physical blows, not just the content, but the public nature of it. The fact that he'd chosen this moment, this crowd, this celebration, to finally say what he'd been thinking for years. I felt my hands clench involuntarily. 34 years of swallowed pride, of biting my tongue, of letting him believe whatever story made him feel better about his son. 34 years of protecting a secret that would have changed everything. But not tonight. Tonight I was just Diego the janitor, Diego the disappointment, Diego the practical branch on the Rivera family tree. Tomorrow, though, tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow, CEO Jonathan Blackwood would walk into that boardroom at Meridian Technologies, see me sitting at the conference table, and everything would change. Tomorrow, the invisible man would become visible in ways my father couldn't imagine. But tonight, I finished my plastic cup of punch, managed one more weak smile, and did what I'd been doing my entire life. I absorbed the humiliation and waited for my moment. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. The alarm buzzed at 4:30 a.m., just like it had every weekday for the past 18 months. I rolled out of bed in my cramped studio apartment, the sound of early morning traffic already humming through the thin walls. Most people in Phoenix were still hours away from their first cup of coffee, but my day began in the darkness, the way it had for most of my adult life. The shower was lukewarm at best. The mirror above the sink had a crack running down the left side that split my reflection into two uneven pieces. This was my reality now. Discount furniture, generic brand cereal, and a wardrobe that consisted entirely of khakis and polo shirts, with the Meridian Technologies logo embroidered on the chest. Diego Torres, Building Services Specialist. That's what my name tag said. That's what everyone at Meridian knew me as. The quiet guy who showed up before dawn, cleaned the executive offices, and disappeared before the important people arrived. What they didn't know was that I'd been studying their faces for over a year, learning their habits, their routines, their secrets. CEO Jonathan Blackwood liked his coffee black, and his office kept at exactly 68 degrees. CFO Patricia Chen always arrived by 6:45 a.m. and worked through lunch at her desk. Director of Operations Michael Foster had a gambling problem he thought nobody noticed, taking betting calls in the supply closet during break times. I knew these things because invisible people see everything. The drive to Meridian took 23 minutes through empty streets. The building rose 32 floors into the desert sky, all glass and steel and architectural ambition. During business hours, it buzzed with the energy of 800 employees managing government contracts worth billions of dollars. But at 5:15 a.m., it belonged to me and the two security guards who barely looked up from their crossword puzzles when I badged in. My cart was exactly where I'd left it the night before. Yellow plastic bucket, industrial-grade mop, microfiber cloths, spray bottles filled with cleaning solutions that smelled like artificial lemon and broken dreams. The tools of my trade, or at least the trade everyone thought I practiced. I started on the 15th floor, working my way up through middle management offices filled with family photos and motivational posters. These people had normal lives, normal problems. They worried about mortgage payments and parent-teacher conferences, and whether their kids would get into good colleges. Their computers held spreadsheets and quarterly reports and email chains about office birthday parties. The 18th floor housed the senior executives. Bigger offices, better furniture, problems that required security clearances to understand. I'd been cleaning these offices for 18 months, and in all that time, only 3 people had ever spoken to me directly. The rest treated me like part of the furniture. Useful, necessary, but not quite human enough to acknowledge. Patricia Chen was always polite. A nod when she passed me in the hallway, a quiet "thank you" when she found her office spotless each morning. She'd immigrated from Taiwan 20 years ago with an engineering degree and enough determination to claw her way up to CFO. I respected that kind of persistence. Michael Foster pretended I didn't exist, which was fine by me. His gambling debts were approaching 6 figures, and desperate people made dangerous decisions. I'd seen enough desperate people in my previous life to recognize the warning signs. But Jonathan Blackwood was different. He watched me sometimes when he thought I wasn't looking. Not with suspicion, exactly, but with curiosity. Like he sensed something beneath the surface that didn't quite fit the janitor narrative. This morning was no different. I was emptying his wastebasket when he appeared in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, earlier than usual. "Morning, Diego," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone executives used when they wanted to seem approachable. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwood." I kept my eyes down, focused on replacing the trash bag. "You know, I've been meaning to ask you something." He stepped into the office, closing the door behind him. "How long did you serve?" My hands froze on the trash bag. Slowly, I looked up to meet his eyes. They were sharp, intelligent, the kind that missed very little. "I'm sorry, sir?" "Military service," he said, settling into the chair behind his desk. "I can spot it from a mile away. The way you stand, the way you organize your cart, the way you check corners when you enter a room. How long?" For a moment, I considered maintaining the facade. Diego Torres, career custodian, man without a past worth mentioning. But something in Blackwood's expression suggested he already knew more than he was letting on. 22 years, I said finally. He nodded slowly, like a puzzle piece had just clicked into place. "What branch?" "Navy." "Rank?" The question hung in the air between us. This was the moment where everything could change. Where the careful construction of my invisible life could crumble with a single word. "Rear Admiral," I said quietly. Blackwood set down his coffee mug with deliberate precision. "Lower half or upper half?" "Upper half, 2 stars." The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Phoenix was beginning to wake up. Cars moved like ants along the freeway far below. Normal people heading to normal jobs where their biggest deception involved calling in sick to play golf. "Admiral Diego Torres," Blackwood said finally, like he was testing how the words felt in his mouth. "I'll be damned." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents and photographs. My official Navy portrait stared back at me from the top page. Younger, in dress whites, wearing the 2 stars that had taken me 22 years to earn. "You've been investigating me," I said. "For about 6 months now," he confirmed. Ever since our head of security mentioned that our overnight custodian had better situational awareness than most of our contracted guards, started me wondering what kind of man chooses to mop floors after commanding naval operations in the Persian Gulf. He flipped through the folder, page by page. My service record, commendations, classified mission summaries with most of the details blacked out. 22 years of my life reduced to paper and bureaucratic language. Operation Desert Shield, Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, he read aloud. Silver Star, Bronze Star, Defense Superior Service Medal, Legion of Merit, 3 deployments to hostile waters, 2 commendations for valor under fire, and 1 very interesting notation about a classified operation that prevented a significant international incident. He looked up from the folder. "Help me understand something, Admiral. Why is a man with your background emptying trash cans in corporate America?" It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself for 18 months. "Sometimes you need to disappear for a while," I said. "Figure out who you are when nobody's watching. When there are no salutes, no ceremonies, no weight of command pressing down on your shoulders. And pushing a mop helps with that? You'd be surprised. There's honesty in simple work. Nobody expects anything from you except clean floors and empty waste baskets. No politics, no life or death decisions, no responsibility for the lives of 3,000 sailors under your command." Blackwood closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. "What if I told you that tomorrow's board meeting isn't really about quarterly reports?" Something cold settled in my stomach. "What's it about?" "Defense contracts. Specifically, a Navy contract for next-generation communication systems that could revolutionize naval operations worldwide. The Pentagon wants Meridian to lead the development, but they're concerned about our security protocols and leadership depth." He paused, studying my face. "They want assurance that we have personnel with the experience and clearance to handle sensitive military technology. Personnel who understand naval operations from the inside." The pieces clicked together like coordinates on a nautical chart. "You knew who I was when you hired me." I suspected. The background check for a custodial position was remarkably thorough for someone with supposedly no military experience. "Your references were interesting, too. A lot of former Navy personnel for a guy who claimed he'd never served." He stood up and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back in a gesture I recognized from my own years in command. "What I didn't know was why you were hiding, whether you were running from something, running towards something, or just running. Took me 6 months to figure out you were healing. And now? Now I'm hoping you're ready to stop healing and start leading again." He turned back to face me. Because tomorrow, when the Pentagon Review Board walks into that conference room, I want them to meet Admiral Diego Torres, not Diego the janitor. The weight of command. I'd forgotten how quickly it could settle back on your shoulders, like an old jacket that still fits perfectly despite the years in storage. What makes you think I'm ready? Because a man who's truly done with leadership doesn't spend 18 months studying executive decision patterns and security protocols while mopping floors. You've been preparing for this moment whether you realize it or not. He was right, of course. The careful observation, the mental cataloging of personalities and procedures, the way I'd unconsciously mapped the building's security vulnerabilities during my nightly rounds. Old habits of command, dormant but not dead. There's one more thing, Blackwood said, returning to his desk. The review board isn't just coming to evaluate our capabilities. They're coming because someone questioned Meridian's suitability for this contract. Someone with enough influence to make the Pentagon nervous. Who? Roberto Rivera, your father. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Rivera Construction submitted a competing bid, lower cost, faster timeline, and a very compelling argument that Meridian lacks the leadership experience for military contracts of this magnitude. Blackwood's expression was grim. Apparently he's been quite vocal about our shortcomings. I stared at him, my mind racing. My father, undermining the company where his son worked as a janitor, not knowing he was sabotaging the same son he'd humiliated just hours earlier. He doesn't know you work here? He doesn't know I exist anywhere that matters. Blackwood nodded slowly. Then tomorrow should be very interesting indeed. Outside the window, the sun was climbing higher, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. In a few hours, this building would fill with people who saw me as invisible. But tomorrow, everything will change. Tomorrow, Admiral Diego Torres would take his place at the conference table, and the invisible man would become the most important person in the room. The coffee shop on Highland Avenue buzzed with the morning rush, but the corner booth in the back remained untouched. I'd been sitting there for 20 minutes, nursing black coffee and watching the door, when she finally walked in. Commander Sarah Mitchell, retired, still carried herself like she owned every room she entered. You look like hell, Torres, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. Her graying hair was pulled back in the same tight bun she'd worn during our deployment to the Arabian Sea, and her eyes held that same sharp intelligence that had made her the best intelligence officer I'd ever worked with. Good to see you too, Mitchell, I signaled the waitress for another cup. Thanks for coming on short notice. When a former admiral calls at midnight asking for off-the-books research, you don't ask questions. You just show up. She accepted her coffee and studied my face. So what's this about? And why do you look like you've been living under an assumed name? I'd kept in touch with maybe a dozen people from my Navy days, but Sarah was the only one I trusted with the full truth. She'd saved my career more than once, covering for decisions that looked questionable on paper but made perfect sense in the field. I need you to dig into Rivera Construction, I said. Everything you can find. Financial records, government contracts, personnel files. Especially anything involving military bids or Pentagon connections. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Roberto Rivera's outfit? The guy's been building half of Arizona for the past 20 years. What's your interest? He's my father. She nearly choked on her coffee. You're what now? Long story. The short version is that he's trying to sabotage a defense contract at the company where I've been working undercover. I need to know how deep his connections go and whether this is personal or just business. Working undercover as what, exactly? A janitor. Sarah stared at me for a full 10 seconds before bursting into laughter. Diego Torres, the man who coordinated naval operations across 3 time zones, has been pushing a mop? It's been therapeutic. It's been insane. She pulled out her phone and started typing. Give me 48 hours. If Rivera's got skeletons, I'll find them. But Torres, what the hell happened between you and your family? That was the question I'd been avoiding for 18 months. The real reason I'd disappeared into anonymity instead of transitioning to a comfortable consulting job or teaching position at the Naval Academy. They never knew who I was, I said finally. 22 years in the Navy, and they thought I was just a career enlisted man floating around on ships. My father used to tell people I was finding myself in the military, like it was some kind of extended summer camp. You never told them about your rank? I tried, early on, but every conversation became about how Marcus was getting promoted at Goldman Sachs, or how Liam was opening another construction office. Military service didn't fit their definition of success, so they just ignored it. Sarah leaned back in her chair, processing this information. So when you retired, they assumed you'd failed. They assumed I'd finally come to my senses and would join the family business. When I took the janitor job instead, it confirmed everything they already believed about me. Quote, which was that I was disappointed, the Rivera who never lived up to his potential. Sarah was quiet for a moment, watching the morning crowd filter in and out of the coffee shop. Lawyers heading to court, construction workers grabbing breakfast burritos, real estate agents clutching oversized phones, normal people living normal lives where family dynamics didn't require security clearances to understand. There's something else, I said. Last night, my father gave a speech at my cousin's celebration. 300 people, open bar, the works. He spent 10 minutes talking about Marcus's achievements, and then used me as a punchline. What kind of punchline? The kind where he explained to a room full of business leaders that every family needs its worker bees, that someone has to empty the trash cans while the visionaries change the world. Sarah's expression darkened. In public? In public, on microphone, with people recording it on their phones. He's this Torres. The best part? He doesn't know that the company he's trying to destroy employs his son. He's been bad-mouthing Meridian Technologies for months, telling anyone who'll listen that we don't have the leadership experience for major defense contracts. All while his own son has been mopping the floors of their executive offices. Sarah pulled out a small notebook and started writing. This isn't just about money, is it? This feels personal. Everything's personal with Roberto Rivera. He doesn't just want to win contracts, he wants to prove that his way of thinking is superior, that his definition of success is the only one that matters. And what happens when he finds out who you really are? I'd been thinking about that question all night, the moment when Admiral Diego Torres would walk into that boardroom and take his seat at the conference table, when the invisible man would become the most qualified person in the room. Honestly, I think it'll destroy him. Sarah looked up from her notebook. Good. Maybe he deserves a little destruction. We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching Phoenix wake up outside the window. But my mind was already racing ahead to the next 24 hours, to the Pentagon Review Board, and the confrontation that had been 22 years in the making. There's one more thing I need you to look into, I said. Roberto's been unusually aggressive about this particular contract. More so than his normal competitive behavior. I want to know why Meridian Technologies specifically triggered such a strong response. You think there's a connection you're missing? I think my father doesn't do anything without multiple angles. If he's gunning for Meridian this hard, there's a reason beyond just winning another government contract. Sarah closed her notebook and slipped it back into her jacket. I'll start with his financial records and work backward. If Rivera's got ulterior motives, they'll show up in the money trail. Be careful, Sarah. My father's built an empire on relationships and favors. He's got friends in places that matter. So do I. She stood up and tossed a $5 bill on the table. Besides, I've never met a construction mogul who could outmaneuver Navy intelligence. Give me 2 days. After Sarah left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, staring at my reflection in the window and thinking about the last time I'd worn my dress uniform. It was during the retirement ceremony at Naval Base San Diego 18 months ago. 300 sailors in formation, a 21-gun salute, and a flag folded with military precision. My parents hadn't come. They'd been invited, of course. My aide had sent them a formal invitation, with full ceremony details and travel arrangements. My mother called 2 days before to explain that they had a prior commitment, some charity auction that Roberto couldn't miss because it was important for business relationships. You understand me, Joe, she'd said, using the childhood nickname that somehow made the rejection hurt worse. Your father has responsibilities to the company. Besides, it's not like you're retiring from a real job. You can have another ceremony anytime. Another ceremony anytime. Like 22 years of naval service was a rehearsal for something more important. I stood on that ceremony platform accepting congratulations from admirals and government officials who understood the weight of command. while my family attended an auction for children's hospital equipment 3 states away. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my career protecting American interests around the world, but the Americans I'd most wanted to impress had already decided I wasn't worth their time. That night, alone in my temporary quarters, I'd made the decision to disappear. Not dramatically, not permanently, just long enough to figure out who Diego Torres was when nobody expected him to be Admiral Torres. The janitor job at Meridian Technologies had been perfect. Anonymous, invisible, simple. 8 hours of honest work, with no politics, no life or death decisions, no weight of command pressing down on my shoulders. Just clean floors and empty wastebaskets, and the strange peace that came from being completely overlooked. But invisibility was a luxury I could no longer afford. My phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan Blackwood. Pentagon team arrives at 0800 tomorrow. Conference room C. Full dress uniform required. Full dress uniform. I hadn't worn it since the retirement ceremony, hadn't even looked at it since packing it away in the back of my closet. Tomorrow, Admiral Diego Torres would emerge from 18 months of self-imposed exile, and the invisible man would take his place at a conference table where defense contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars hung in the balance. More importantly, tomorrow my father would walk into that same conference room, expecting to find a company he could easily intimidate and outmaneuver. Instead, he'd find his son, the son he'd publicly humiliated just 24 hours earlier, sitting across from him wearing 2 stars and enough military credentials to make his head spin. I finished my coffee and walked out into the Phoenix heat, already mentally preparing for the conversation that would change everything. Not just between me and my father, but between me and the man I'd been hiding from for 18 months. Tomorrow, the invisible man will become visible again. And Roberto Rivera would learn that sometimes the people you dismiss as worker bees turn out to be admirals. The call came at 3:17 a.m., jarring me from the first decent sleep I'd managed in weeks. Sarah Mitchell's voice cut through the darkness like a blade. "Torres, we have a problem, a big one." I sat up, instantly alert. Years of naval command had trained me to go from unconscious to fully operational in seconds. "What did you find?" "It's not what I found about your father, it's what I found about you." Her voice carried an edge I'd never heard before, even during our worst intelligence briefings. "Someone's been digging into your background, Diego. Deep digging. Military records, financial history, personal connections, professional-grade surveillance." The room suddenly felt colder. "How deep?" "Deep enough to know about the Jakarta operation. Deep enough to know about the classified communications protocol you developed for submarine warfare. Deep enough to know things that shouldn't exist outside of Pentagon's secure servers." I was fully awake now, my mind racing through possibilities. Who's doing the digging? That's where it gets interesting. The digital fingerprints lead back to a private investigation firm in Denver. High-end outfit that specializes in corporate espionage and background verification for defense contractors. Rivera Construction hired them? Not directly. The firm was hired by a shell company, which was funded by a private investment group, which traces back to... She paused. Blackwater Industries. The name hit me like a physical blow. Blackwater Industries, the defense contracting giant that had been circling government contracts like vultures for the past decade. They specialized in taking established companies and either absorbing them or destroying their reputations to eliminate competition. Roberto's working with Blackwater? It looks like Blackwater approached Rivera Construction 6 months ago with a partnership proposal. They'd provide the technical expertise and political connections for major defense contracts, and Rivera would provide the construction infrastructure and local relationships. 6 months ago, right around the time I'd started working at Meridian Technologies. The timing couldn't be coincidental. There's more, Sarah continued. Blackwater's CEO is a man named Vincent Carver, former Marine colonel, disgraced and discharged 15 years ago for misappropriation of funds during Operation Iraqi Freedom. He's been holding a grudge against the Navy establishment ever since. Why would that matter? Because, Admiral, your name appears on the investigation report that led to his discharge. The pieces click together like coordinates on a targeting system. 15 years ago, during my tour as a Navy liaison to joint operations in Iraq, I uncovered evidence of a Marine colonel skimming money from construction contracts meant for base infrastructure. The investigation had been classified, the discharge quietly handled to avoid scandal. I'd thought the matter was buried in bureaucratic files that would never see daylight again. Apparently, Vincent Carver had never forgotten. So this isn't just about a defense contract, I said. This is about revenge. Carver's been waiting 15 years for a chance to destroy your career, and when he discovered that the invisible janitor at Meridian Technologies was actually Admiral Diego Torres, he saw his opportunity. I stood up and walked to the window. Phoenix spread out below me in the pre-dawn darkness. Millions of people sleeping peacefully while their lives were shaped by forces they couldn't see or understand. How much does my father know? That's the question I can't answer yet. Either Roberto Rivera is a willing participant in a conspiracy to destroy his own son, or he's being manipulated by people who know exactly which buttons to push. The second option felt worse somehow. The idea that my father's rejection was authentic hurt, but it was familiar pain. The possibility that his latest humiliation had been orchestrated by outside forces added a layer of betrayal I wasn't prepared for. What's the end game here? Best case scenario? Blackwater uses the Rivera partnership to win the Meridian contract, makes billions on defense deals, and your father gets rich while never knowing he helped destroy his son's career. Sarah's voice grew grimmer. Worst case scenario? They expose your identity tomorrow in a way that makes you look like a fraud or security risk, destroy Meridian's credibility, and eliminate both you and the company from future government work. I closed my eyes and leaned against the window. 22 years of naval service, and it all came down to this. A conference room confrontation that had been orchestrated by an enemy I'd forgotten, and a father who'd never bothered to know me. There's one more thing, Sarah said quietly. The investigation firm didn't just look into your military record, they dug into your personal life. They know about your apartment, your routine, your work schedule. They know you've been living as Diego the janitor for 18 months. Which means they know you'll be in that conference room tomorrow, and they're prepared for it. This isn't going to be a surprise revelation, Diego. It's going to be an ambush. After Sarah hung up, I sat in the darkness for an hour, staring at the uniform hanging in my closet. Dress blues with Admiral's stars, ribbon rack representing 2 decades of service, gold braid that had taken years to earn. Tomorrow I'd planned to walk into that conference room and reclaim my identity with dignity and authority. Instead, I'd be walking into a trap. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. We know who you are, Admiral. The question is, does your family? The message was followed by a photograph, me in my janitor's uniform, emptying trash in Jonathan Blackwood's office. But the timestamp showed it was taken 3 days ago, long before Blackwood and I had our conversation about my true identity. They'd been watching me for weeks. Another text arrived. Tomorrow's meeting should be very interesting. We look forward to reuniting father and son. I stared at the messages until my eyes burned. 15 years ago, I'd done my duty as a naval officer and reported criminal activity. I'd followed protocol, filed the proper reports, and moved on with my career. I'd never given Vincent Carver another thought. But he'd been thinking about me. For 15 years, he'd been building his empire and waiting for his moment. When Blackwater Industries grew large enough to influence major defense contracts, when they needed a construction partner with the right political connections, when their corporate intelligence discovered that Admiral Diego Torres was hiding in plain sight, all the pieces had finally aligned. The cruelest part was how perfectly they'd played my father. Roberto Rivera's ego, his need to be the most successful contractor in Arizona, his inability to see his son as anything more than a disappointment. All of it had been weaponized against me by people who understood family dynamics better than I'd understood them myself. I pulled out my laptop and started typing. If tomorrow was going to be an ambush, I needed to be prepared with more than just my uniform and service record. I needed evidence, documentation, proof that the attack on my credibility was orchestrated by people with their own agenda. Sarah had given me Vincent Carver's name and Blackwater's connection to Rivera Construction. Now I needed to trace the financial relationships, the timeline of their partnership, the specific ways they'd manipulated my father into becoming their weapon against me. By 6 a.m., I had a picture that was both clearer and more disturbing than I'd imagined. Blackwater hadn't just hired Rivera Construction as a partner, they'd essentially bought him. Loans for equipment purchases, guaranteed contracts for infrastructure projects, even funding for the country club celebration where my father had humiliated me just 2 nights ago. Every rejection, every dismissal, every moment of family shame had been purchased and orchestrated by a man who'd spent 15 years planning his revenge against me. The irony was suffocating. I'd become invisible to heal from the weight of command, but my invisibility had made me vulnerable to an enemy who understood that the most effective attacks come from the people closest to you. At 7 a.m., I put on my dress uniform for the first time in 18 months. The fabric felt foreign against my skin, the weight of the metals unfamiliar after months of khakis and polo shirts. But as I adjusted the Admiral's stars on my collar, something shifted inside me. I wasn't Diego the janitor anymore. I wasn't Diego's disappointment. I was Rear Admiral Diego Torres, United States Navy, and I was done hiding. Let them bring their ambush. Let my father discover who his son really was in the most public way possible. Let Vincent Carver try to destroy me with the same weapons I'd been carrying for 22 years. Today, the invisible man would become visible. And everyone in that conference room was about to learn the difference between a janitor with a mop and an admiral with a mission. The Meridian Technologies parking garage at 6:30 a.m. was a cathedral of concrete and shadows. I sat in my 10-year-old Honda Civic, the same car I'd driven to work every day for 18 months, but today it felt like a submarine preparing for surface operations. The dress uniform in the garment bag hanging behind me represented more than just clothing. It was armor for a battle I'd been avoiding my entire adult life. My phone rang. Jonathan Blackwood's voice was tense, clipped. "Diego, we have a situation. The Pentagon review team arrived early and they brought additional personnel. This isn't the small evaluation I was expecting." "How many people?" 12, including 2 Army colonels, a Navy captain, and someone from the Defense Intelligence Agency. They've set up in Conference Room A instead of C. This feels like a formal tribunal, not a contract review. I closed my eyes. Vincent Carver wasn't just planning to ambush me, he was orchestrating a full military court of public opinion. "What about Rivera Construction?" "Your father's team is already here. 3 vehicles in the executive parking area, including a black SUV with government plates." "Diego, I think we're walking into something bigger than either of us anticipated. I'll be up in 10 minutes. Quote, "Are you sure you're ready for this?" I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. 18 months of anonymity had aged me in subtle ways. Lines around my eyes from squinting at bathroom fixtures under fluorescent lights, calluses on my hands from mop handles, a posture that had learned to make itself small and invisible. But underneath all of that, Admiral Diego Torres was still there, waiting. I've been ready for 22 years, I just forgot for a while. I took the service elevator to avoid the main lobby, using my janitor's keycard one last time. The executive washroom on the 32nd floor was empty, elegant marble and brass fixtures that I'd cleaned hundreds of times. Today, I used it to transform. The dress uniform fit perfectly, muscle memory guiding my fingers through the precise placement of ribbons and insignia. Silver dolphins on my chest marking submarine qualification. Combat action ribbon from the Persian Gulf. Navy Distinguished Service Medal. Each piece told a story that my family had never bothered to learn. When I stepped out of that washroom, Diego the janitor ceased to exist. The hallway leading to Conference Room A buzzed with activity. Men in expensive suits clustered around laptops, their voices carrying the urgency of people managing a crisis. I recognized the body language from countless military briefings. This was damage control mode. Patricia Chen appeared at my elbow. "Admiral Torres?" She'd never used my rank before, but somehow she wasn't surprised to see me in uniform. "Mr. Blackwood is waiting for you in his office." Blackwood's office had been transformed into a command center. Multiple screens displayed financial charts, contract timelines, and what appeared to be surveillance footage. Sarah Mitchell sat at the conference table, her laptop open, looking like she'd been working all night. "Torres," she said without looking up, "I've got updates you're not going to like." Blackwood gestured to a chair. Admiral, Commander Mitchell has been briefing me on the Blackwater situation. We're not just facing a business competitor, we're dealing with a coordinated attack on multiple fronts. Sarah turned her laptop toward me. The screen showed a complex network diagram connecting Rivera Construction, Blackwater Industries, and nearly a dozen shell companies. Vincent Carver's been planning this for 3 years, not 6 months. The partnership with your father was just the final piece. Quote, "Show him the financial records," Blackwood said grimly. Sarah clicked a spreadsheet that made my stomach drop. Rivera Construction is effectively owned by Blackwater Industries. Your father's company is leveraged to the point where Carver controls every major decision. The country club celebration where you were humiliated? Blackwater funded it as a networking event to position your father for this contract. They bought my own humiliation, I said quietly. It gets worse. Sarah opened another file. Remember how your father never came to your retirement ceremony? He was at that charity auction in Las Vegas? I nodded. The charity was fake, a Blackwater front company designed to look legitimate. Your father was actually at a private meeting with Carver, being briefed on the Meridian Technologies contract and coached on how to position Rivera Construction as the superior choice. The room went silent. While I'd been standing on a ceremonial platform, accepting the folded flag and 21-gun salute that marked the end of my naval career, my father had been in a Las Vegas hotel room learning how to destroy the company where his son would eventually find refuge. There's more, Sarah continued. The surveillance on you started 18 months ago, the day after you were hired at Meridian. They've been tracking your movements, recording your routines, and building a psychological profile. They know about your apartment, your grocery shopping habits, even which coffee shop you visit. Blackwood pulled up security footage on another screen. This is from our building's cameras over the past 6 months. Watch the people in the background. I studied the footage, my trained eye catching details that civilian security might miss. The same faces appeared repeatedly in different locations. The lobby, the parking garage, the street outside. Professional surveillance, rotating teams, careful coordination. They've been inside our security perimeter for months, I said. And they know you're going to be in that conference room today, Sarah added. Vincent Carver is expecting Admiral Torres to walk through that door, which means he's prepared for it. I stood up and walked to the window. 32 floors below, Phoenix was waking up to what looked like a normal Thursday morning. Traffic moved in predictable patterns, people hurried to jobs where their biggest deception involved calling in sick to play golf. What's Carver's endgame? I asked. Blackwood and Sarah exchanged glances. We think he's going to expose your identity in a way that makes you look like a fraud or security risk, Sarah said. Paint you as an unstable ex-military officer who's been deceiving your employers and living under false pretenses. The fact that you've been working as a janitor for 18 months plays right into that narrative, Blackwood added. It makes you look either mentally unfit or deliberately deceptive. I turned back to face them. And my father? Your father probably doesn't know the full scope of what he's involved in, Sarah said. But when Carver reveals your identity today, Roberto's reaction will be captured and used as evidence that even your own family doesn't trust you. The perfect trap. My father's genuine shock and confusion would be weaponized against me, his years of dismissal and disappointment transformed into testimony about my character and stability. There's one thing they don't know, I said finally. What's that? I'm not the same man who went into hiding 18 months ago. I've had time to think, to observe, to understand exactly how power works in civilian institutions. And I've had time to remember why I became a naval officer in the first place. I moved to Blackwood's desk and started writing on a legal pad. Names, connections, financial relationships, timeline of events. The same kind of operational planning I'd used to coordinate multi-ship naval exercises. We're not going to walk into their ambush, I said. We're going to spring our own. Sarah leaned forward. What do you have in mind? Vincent Carver's been planning this revenge fantasy for 15 years, but he's made one critical error. He's forgotten that the best naval operations aren't about superior firepower. They're about superior intelligence and timing. I turned the legal pad toward them. Carver thinks he's controlling the narrative because he has surveillance footage and financial leverage over my father, but we have something better. Which is? We have the truth. And we have 18 months of evidence showing exactly how Blackwater Industries operates, how they manipulate their partners, and how they've been infiltrating government contractors to eliminate competition. Blackwood's eyes widened. You've been gathering intelligence this entire time. Not intentionally, at first, but once Sarah started digging into Rivera Construction, I realized that my 18 months of invisibility had given me access to information that Carver never suspected I was collecting. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through photos. Every conversation I overheard while mopping floors, every document I saw while emptying waste baskets, every security vulnerability I noticed while working overnight shifts. Carver thinks he's been watching me, but I've been watching everyone. Sarah smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. You've been conducting an undercover investigation. And today, Vincent Carver is going to learn the difference between revenge and justice. I looked at my watch. 7:45 a.m. In 15 minutes, I'd walk into conference room A and face the two men who'd shaped my adult life in the most destructive ways possible. My father, who'd never bothered to know me, and Vincent Carver, who'd known me too well. But they were both about to meet a version of Diego Torres that neither of them had planned for. Gentlemen, I said, straightening my uniform jacket, let's go remind the Pentagon why they trusted me with 2 stars in the first place. Conference room A felt like a court-martial waiting to happen. 12 Pentagon officials sat along one side of the mahogany table, their uniforms and suits creating a wall of federal authority. Across from them, Roberto Rivera commanded his own delegation. 3 Rivera Construction executives, 2 men I didn't recognize in expensive suits, and at the head of their formation, a silver-haired man whose military bearing was unmistakable even in civilian clothes. Vincent Carver, 15 years older, carrying more weight, but the same cold intelligence in his eyes that I remembered from our brief encounters in Iraq. He spotted me the moment I entered the room, and his smile carried the satisfaction of a man whose long-planned revenge was finally within reach. My father looked exactly as he had 2 nights ago at the country club, confident, commanding, completely unaware that his world was about to shift on its axis. He was deep in conversation with a Navy captain, probably explaining why Rivera Construction's leadership experience made them the obvious choice for the contract. The moment I stepped fully into the room, wearing my dress blues with Admiral's stars gleaming under the fluorescent lights, the conversation died like someone had pulled a power switch. Roberto Rivera's face went through a progression of emotions that would have been comical if they weren't so painful to watch. Confusion first, as his brain tried to process why a Navy admiral was entering a civilian contractor meeting. Then recognition, as my features resolved into the sun he thought he knew. Finally, something between shock and horror, as the implications crashed over him like a rogue wave. Diego? The word came out like a question, like he was asking permission to believe what he was seeing. Vincent Carver's smile widened. Gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Rear Admiral Diego Torres, United States Navy, retired, also known to Meridian Technologies employees as Diego the Janitor. The Pentagon officials turned in their chairs, their expressions ranging from confusion to suspicion. This was exactly the narrative Carver had wanted to establish. The unstable ex-military officer living under false pretenses, deceiving his employers about his identity. Admiral Torres, said the ranking Army colonel, his voice carefully neutral, perhaps you could explain your unconventional employment situation. I remained standing, hands clasped behind my back in parade rest. Certainly, Colonel. For the past 18 months, I've been conducting an undercover assessment of corporate security protocols and defense contractor vulnerabilities at the request of naval intelligence. The lie came out smoothly, confidently, backed by 22 years of experience briefing senior officers. It wasn't entirely false. I had been observing security protocols, just not officially. Carver's smile faltered slightly. This wasn't the defensive, embarrassed response he'd expected. That's ridiculous, Roberto said, finding his voice. My son works as a janitor. He empties trash cans and mops floors. He can't be... A rear admiral? I finished. I understand your confusion, sir. Maintaining operational security required complete commitment to the cover identity. That included maintaining distance from family members who might inadvertently compromise the mission. I moved to the presentation screen at the front of the room and connected my laptop. With your permission, I'd like to brief you on the intelligence I've gathered during this operation. The Pentagon officials leaned forward with interest. This was the kind of unconventional intelligence work that the military valued, even if it hadn't been officially sanctioned. Over the past 18 months, I began, I've documented systematic security vulnerabilities in civilian defense contractors, including evidence of foreign surveillance, corporate espionage, and coordinated efforts to manipulate government contract awards. The first slide showed the network diagram Sarah had created, connecting Blackwater Industries to Rivera Construction through a web of shell companies and financial relationships. Vincent Carver, CEO of Blackwater Industries, has spent 3 years establishing financial control over Rivera Construction for the specific purpose of eliminating Meridian Technologies from defense contract consideration. I clicked to the next slide. Financial records showing the loans, guarantees, and hidden ownership structures that made Rivera Construction a subsidiary of Blackwater in all but name. Mr. Carver's motivation isn't business competition, it's personal revenge against me for my role in his military discharge 15 years ago. Carver shot to his feet. That's classified information, you can't. It was classified, I interrupted. Until you made it relevant to national security by using it to manipulate defense contracts. I clicked to another slide showing the timeline of his discharge and the current contract manipulation. Misappropriation of funds during Operation Iraqi Freedom, discharge for conduct unbecoming an officer, and a 15-year campaign to rebuild your reputation while planning revenge against the naval officer who exposed your crimes. The room was dead silent. Roberto Rivera stared at the screen like he was reading his own obituary. Furthermore, I continued, Blackwater Industries has been conducting illegal surveillance of military personnel, infiltrating contractor security systems, and using financial leverage to control the business decisions of supposedly independent companies. I turned to face my father directly. Mr. Rivera, were you aware that the charity auction you attended during my retirement ceremony was a fake event designed to get you away from my ceremony and into a planning meeting with Mr. Carver? Roberto's face went white. No, that can't be. The Children's Hospital Foundation of Nevada doesn't exist, I said gently. It was a Blackwater shell company. You spent the day my naval career ended learning how to destroy the company where I would eventually seek employment. Vincent Carver was furious now, his careful plan unraveling in real time. This is all speculation and conspiracy theories. Admiral Torres has been living a lie for 18 months, deceiving his employers, working under false pretenses. Actually, Jonathan Blackwood interrupted from the back of the room, Admiral Torres has been working under my direct knowledge and supervision for the past 6 months. His intelligence gathering has been instrumental in identifying the security threats you've just witnessed. Another lie, but delivered with corporate authority that carried weight in rooms like this. The Navy captain at the Pentagon table leaned forward. Admiral Torres, in your assessment, what level of security risk does Blackwater Industries represent to ongoing defense operations? Significant and immediate, I replied. They've demonstrated the ability to infiltrate contractor operations, manipulate personnel decisions, and compromise the integrity of the bidding process. Any contract awarded to Rivera Construction would effectively be controlled by an organization led by a discharged military officer with documented criminal history and clear personal motivations for revenge against current defense establishment personnel. The Pentagon Review Board spent 40 minutes asking detailed questions about my intelligence findings. Vincent Carver tried several times to discredit my testimony, but each attempt only highlighted the depth of surveillance and manipulation I'd documented. By the time the formal session ended, Blackwater Industries' reputation was in ruins, and Rivera Construction's independence was revealed as a carefully constructed fiction. The board retired for deliberation, leaving me alone in the conference room with my father and the wreckage of his business empire. Roberto Rivera sat heavily in his chair, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. 22 years, he said finally. You served for 22 years and I never knew. You never asked. I assumed. He looked up at me, And for the first time in my adult life, I saw vulnerability in his eyes instead of disappointment. The night you graduated from high school, you said you were thinking about the military. I told you it was a waste of time, that you should focus on building something real. I remember. You never mentioned it again, you just disappeared for months at a time. I thought you were drifting, trying to find yourself. When you came back between deployments, you seemed different, but I figured it was just growing up. I sat down across from him, the same man who'd humiliated me 48 hours ago, but somehow smaller now, diminished by the weight of realizing he'd never really known his son. Why didn't you tell me, he asked. Why didn't you make me understand? I tried at first. But every conversation became about Marcus's latest promotion, or Liam's new office. Military service didn't fit your definition of success, so you found ways to change the subject. Roberto was quiet for a long moment. The retirement ceremony. You invited us. You had a prior commitment. To a fake charity auction, he laughed bitterly. I spent the day you ended your military career learning how to destroy your civilian career. Jesus, Diego, what kind of father does that? The kind who didn't know he was doing it. That's almost worse. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Phoenix skyline. All these years, I thought I was building something for you and your cousins. A legacy, a foundation you could build on. Instead, I was being manipulated by someone who wanted to hurt you. Dad, I called you a burden, he said quietly. In front of 300 people, I called my son, a rear admiral in the United States Navy, a burden. The silence stretched between us like 22 years of missed conversations. Vincent Carver knew exactly what he was doing, I said finally. He studied our family dynamics, understood your personality, and used your love for the business against both of us. You're as much a victim here as I am. No. Roberto turned back to face me. I'm not a victim. I'm a father who is too proud and too stubborn to really know his son. Carver didn't create that. He just exploited it. 6 months later, I stood in the same conference room where my identity had been revealed, but everything else had changed. The walls were lined with photographs from the groundbreaking ceremony for the Torres Institute for Military Transition, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping veterans navigate the psychological and practical challenges of returning to civilian life. The idea had come from my own 18 months of invisibility, from the understanding that sometimes healing required anonymity, and that the transition from military to civilian life was more complex than most people realized. Roberto Rivera had liquidated his business empire to fund the Institute's startup costs. It was his way of turning Carver's manipulation into something constructive, of transforming the guilt and regret of missed opportunities into a foundation for helping other families avoid the same mistakes. The Institute occupied the top 3 floors of the Meridian Technologies building, donated by Jonathan Blackwood, as part of a partnership program between corporate America and Veteran Services. We offered counseling, career transition assistance, family therapy, and something that didn't exist anywhere else, a safe space for veterans to be invisible for a while without judgment or pressure to immediately reintegrate. Admiral Torres? My assistant appeared in the doorway. Your 2 p.m. appointment is here. I looked up from the quarterly report I'd been reviewing. These days, my uniform consisted of khakis and polo shirts again, but by choice rather than disguise. The military formality that had defined my identity for 22 years had given way to something more flexible, more human. The young woman who entered my office wore civilian clothes, but her bearing was unmistakably military. Marine, I guessed, probably recently discharged, carrying the weight of service that didn't translate easily to job interviews and performance reviews. Sergeant Martinez, I said, gesturing to the chairs in front of my desk, thank you for coming in. I understand you're having some difficulty with the transition process. She sat down stiffly, back straight, eyes forward. Yes, sir. I've been out for 4 months, and I can't seem to, I don't know how to be a civilian. Tell me about your last day in uniform. For the next hour, we talked about the disorientation of losing military structure, the challenge of explaining military experience to civilian employers, and the strange grief that came with leaving an identity that had defined her adult life. Sometimes I think about enlisting again, she admitted, Not because I miss the military exactly, but because I don't know who I am without it. That's normal, I said. More normal than most people realize. The transition isn't just about finding a new job. It's about rebuilding your sense of self from the ground up. How long does it take? Quote, I thought about my own journey, from Admiral Torres to Diego the Janitor, to whatever I was becoming now, something between military leader and civilian advocate, using the skills of command to serve people instead of missions. As long as it takes, I said, and that's okay. After Sergeant Martinez left, I walked to the window and looked out at the city where I'd learned to become invisible and then chosen to be seen again. Somewhere out there, other veterans were struggling with transitions that their families didn't understand, carrying skills and experiences that didn't fit neatly into civilian categories. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. Dinner Sunday? Your mother wants to hear about the Navy. For real this time. I smiled and typed back, I'll bring pictures. 22 years of service, 18 months of healing, and a lifetime of learning that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons or tactics, but with patience, understanding, and the courage to let people see who you really are. The invisible man had finally learned how to be visible on his own terms. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.